Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this narration of the web novel Humans Don't Make Good Familiars. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below, and, as always, I hope that you enjoy. Part 56. Jake's POV. I'll see you in a sec, I said, before Suma and Vindicta flew up to the side of the cliff and out of view. I summoned you, Paxus, I heard Von Pack shout in the distance, and his familiar disappeared. Then Vindicta's did. Then, finally, I did. Once I arrived, I looked at the path up ahead, and a feeling of dread washed over me. What's wrong? Suma asked. Nothing, I just don't like caves is all, I said, gesturing to the cramped opening to a small cave. It couldn't have been more than a meter tall and wide, large enough for them, but I would need to get on my hands and knees to squeeze through. I've never been afraid of tight spaces, but this wasn't exactly the same thing. Quit dawdling, let's go, Von Pack said, perching on his familiar saddle and heading into the cave. I think that I may have to ride on your familiar saddle, Vindicta. Jake is too tall for this, Suma said, examining the cave. Of course, Vindicta answered. Suma fluttered over and landed on the side of the saddle because there wasn't a second proper perch for her to use. They made their way into the cave behind Von Pack, and I was left outside. Oh joy, I mumbled and got on my hands and knees to begin crawling. The cave was tight, or at least it felt that way. In reality, I wasn't touching the sides or top of the cave, but that didn't mean that I wasn't feeling the pressure. Thankfully, Von Pack knew how to create fire, so he lit the way for us. I was grateful for it. I know I wouldn't have been able to handle the cave if it were pitch black. Just close your eyes and keep moving, I quietly whispered to myself. As we went along, the cave grew more and more narrow. Eventually, there was no more than an inch of space between me and the sides of the cave. I was not handling it well. Suma's POV. The cave we were walking through started out wide enough, but as we moved along it became less so. Vindicta's and Von Pack's familiars were having no issues as far as I could tell. Jake grew more and more distressed with each passing moment. I could hear his breathing getting heavier and more frequent. Is Jake going to be okay? Vindicta asked me too quietly for the others to hear. I don't know, I answered honestly. I have never seen him like this. Stop, Von Pack announced, prompt. What's wrong? Jake called out, slightly panicking. There is a fork up ahead, left or right? Von Pack answered. Which one is bigger? I asked, trying to make it easier on Jake. Left, he called back after a brief moment of silence. I heard Jake let out an audible sigh. We continued on for a while through the left path. And while Von Pack was right about it being wider, that didn't mean it was wide enough. I can't fit Praxis any longer. We either need to turn back or send our familiars away until we are out of this cave, he announced. Agro is having trouble too, Vindicta said. Jake, I asked. Send me back, he said simply, but urgently. His eyes were wide and he was almost on his stomach by this point. Without another word, I unsummoned Jake, and he disappeared back to his world. Vindicta and Von Pack followed suit, and soon it was just we three, Niama, standing in the dimly lit cave. Without our familiars, the cave felt far less cramped, but certainly not wide open. POV of Von Pack. I and my team, 2 less than Niama, stood in a cave that I was keeping lit with a fire spell. I was creating a ball of fire that hung in the air a few feet away, illuminating enough to see. I guess this means we fly, the unnamed Niama stated. Earlier she received a name from a familiar, but I refused to acknowledge such a manner of receiving a name on principle. We'll have to be careful. The tunnels is getting even more narrow the further we travel. If we fly too fast, we might be injured, the one named Sua said, stating the obvious. Of course, I had already known to fly carefully and did not need her to remind me of such trivial things. She was another one who had been named by that annoying familiar. But since the Grand Duke had already acknowledged her name, it was illegal for any Niema to refuse to use it, so I had no choice in the matter. "Just try not to get left behind," I told them, and began flying down the tunnel. They followed suit. My fire spell produces light, but its range is limited. So, if they fall behind, then they would either need to create their own spell, or they will be lost in the dark. I graciously flew slower than I wanted to, so as to not outpace them. But of course, I received no thanks. "Von Pack, slow down. You're flying too fast," the unnamed one called out. I should have known. Even holding back, I far outclass any commoner. Unfortunately, listening to that commoner distracted me, and I was unable to see and react to the end of the tunnel as it approached from the darkness outside the effects of my spell. "Ah!" I cried out before trying to slow down, but colliding into the wall nonetheless. The POV of Lorik Isbala. My team and I had been skating the mountain for 3 hours at this point, but now we stood at the top. "We should spread out and search for those bands," I suggested. The others agreed, and we began looking for them. The mountain was beautiful. The trees and forested area had been left behind some time ago, but it was replaced by snow and ice. Loyalty was having trouble with the cold, so I unsummoned him and rode on the back of one of the other two's familiars. While we were searching, I decided to simply fly low to the ground so that we could cover as much area as possible. "Found them," one of the others called out. We all converged on the area and saw 4 silver bands hanging from metal poles. "4 of them. That means we are the first to arrive," one of the other two noticed. "Perhaps, but that doesn't mean that we'll be the first back to camp. We should get moving," I said. We took one and strapped it to the saddle of one of our familiars, then began heading down the mountain. Vendictor's point of view. The sound resonated through the tunnel as Von Pack slammed into the end of the tunnel and fell to the floor. I laughed briefly before catching myself and landing safely on the ground by Von Pack, who was completely unconscious. "Well, if you have to be knocked out, best to do it with 2 healers in the room," I said, and began treating Von Pack's injuries. Suma cast her own fire spell as Von Pack's disappeared as soon as he fell unconscious. "What was he thinking?" Suma complained. "Probably something like, 'Ha, I'm the best flyer in the world. I don't need to wait for these commoners,' I mocked. Von Pack groaned as he began to wake up. "What happened?" "You hit the wall and got knocked out," I told him. "Now stop moving. I'm not finished healing you." For a moment, I thought he was going to protest, but instead he stayed still and remained quiet. "Dead end," Suma said, examining the end of the tunnel. "We need to turn back." "Not necessarily," Von Pack said, standing up after I ended the healing spell. "I have an affinity for nature magic. I can move the dirt and extend the tunnels." "I thought that you were a healer," I asked. "I am," he replied. "Not everyone who becomes a healer has to have an affinity for healing magic." "I suppose that's true," I realized. "I don't know. We may just want to go back and take the other tunnel," Suma stated. "That would take time, and if we want to win, then time is not something that we have to spare," Von Pack reasoned. "Digging out a tunnel would take time too, and there is no guarantees that it'll be faster," I pointed out. He seemed annoyed by my response, but instead of snapping, he relented and agreed to go back. We came to the conclusion that if the right was a dead end too, then we would dig rather than go all the way back and lose all the progress that we'd made. End of chapter. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I would just quickly like to give thanks to our Tier 5 members: Elithia, Barky, Feudicyol, Meridian117, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Albarden Gusta, Savage Patch Papa, and Lord Azrakal.